So welcome, and from New Zealand, kia ora, which means both hello and thank you. A really nice way to welcome and bring together a community from all parts of the world today, which is so exciting. My name is Cheryl, and I've been fortunate to visit the Amsterdam coaching community a few times over the last few years. Some of the faces I recognise in there as well. If anyone's been to Agile Amsterdam before, which is normally held, oh hey Michelle, that's actually where I first connected with Michelle, who I think a number of you on the call already know. I think most of Europe and the Agile community probably know Michelle. And Michelle, if you can just come off mute for just a second, I think we have to do one of these.
High five. Oh God, yeah. Finally.
It was actually at Amsterdam, Agile Amsterdam 2 years ago that we came up with the concept of the power of the high five after a couple of beverages after the conference. And the following year, Michelle came back to the conference and was one of our guest speakers, and her talk was called The Power of the High Five. And so so sending high fives out to everyone this morning and this evening. Yeah, thank you for being here. Yes. So we're all just hitting each other in the face. This is an opportunity, hopefully one of many, for us to bring together our international community and talk about topics that are important to all of us. My guess is the topic itself has attracted a lot of Agile coaches into the conversation, but there may also be other practitioners that are here joining this call and interested to learn. To give a little bit of backstory, we've got 3 speakers today. So myself, we've got Pete and Doug Maarschalk, and I possibly am not getting his name right. We actually talked about this beforehand, that there might be some of our guests that are joining us today that might be able to help with my pronunciation of Doug's surname. Doug, where does it originate?
I think it's from our good friends in Holland, but my ancestry is through Southern Africa, so I'm sure it got muddied on the way through.
Awesome. So we've got 3 speakers. A quick overview of the format tonight, or this morning. Format wise, we're each going to hold 15 minutes each for us to put forward to you some concepts and ideas that we've been working on around this role of the Agile coach. So it'll be roughly a 10-minute talk each and presenting some concepts, and then holding 5 minutes for a Q&A at the end. So as the speaker is sharing their concepts, you're welcome to use the chat channel, and I encourage you to put any questions that you're thinking of, or you're welcome to even just put comments or anything that sparks for you, and share those in the chat channel. So in case, I'm sure everyone in this room has used or had to use Zoom a lot lately, but chat usually sitting at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you can put your questions and your comments in there. So the Agile coach role, we're all coming from 3 very different perspectives and lenses. And Pete, Doug and I get together every couple of weeks digitally from around New Zealand, and we talk about what we're seeing in the Agile industry, what we're seeing in the organizations, and some of the concerns that we feel for our Agile coaches, and some of the skills that we think that they're going to need in the future, and how this role is evolving. So the purpose of today is to share some of these concepts. We've also created a white paper, which we haven't yet released. We wanted to get this call in first. What we're going to do is offer the opportunity, if you're interested, is we'll share a link. You can put your email address in, and as soon as we've released the white paper, which we're hoping will be within the week, what we'd love is to get your feedback on that. So that white paper will encompass some of the concepts we talk about today. And from there, we then want to share it and start to get more perspectives from the wider community. So that just gives you an idea. The purpose today, share some concepts, get some questions, share the white paper, and then go from there. So that's our goal. I see some thumbs up from Yolanda. Awesome. All right, Also feel free to use the, oh, we've got panic coming up from Jesper. And again, wonderful to have you all here. Also a special shout out to any of the New Zealanders that are tuning in. It's evening time here. We're officially in the future here. And the good news is that the future looks bright because things are going pretty well here. Or we can give you 12 hours ahead in the future. Without further ado, I would like to pass over to our first speaker of the night. So handing over to Pete, who also very well known in New Zealand and throughout the world as Agile Pete. Agile Pete is one of the co-founders. His other co-founder, Tony, is also on the call as well, co-founded the Agile Collab, and they've got a community of coaches that they're working with in different organizations all the time, learning about this stuff. So I'm going to hand over to Pete, who's going to open us up with our very first go at looking at what is the future for the Agile Coach role. Sending over to Pete.
Thank you, Cheryl. Kia ora, everyone. Welcome. Good evening, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Lovely to have you on board. I'll just start my timer because we're trying to make sure that we keep our little sessions sorted. All right, let's kick that off. This conversation started because we were looking at some of the different techniques, some of the different conversations that we're servicing. And even between the three of us, we discovered that we were having a challenge in actually coming up with a consistent way of presenting a message. So scaling's a big thing here in New Zealand. I presume it is all over the world. And what we were trying to do is find out a way that we could actually work together as coaches to support each other, but respect our different perspectives on things, but try and create a consistent message with the way we took our teams on a journey. Because I don't know whether you're like us, but if you get three coaches together, you probably get at least three opinions, maybe 4 or 5 by the time you've gone around the traps. So we were having some conversations around some topics, and what we realized was we thought we understood them, but fundamentally we disagreed on points. And I think we came to the point where we said, what's causing this? And let's do a little bit of reflection. So what we're going to do today, and we think it's important in understanding coaching styles, is just give you what our lens is. We think we actually bring a bias to the conversation, to the thinking around what we're doing that we need to acknowledge. And then once we've acknowledged it, we need to leverage that as a group and bring it together. So me, for example, I'm a frustrated developer, turned Agile Coach by default. So my journey wasn't to become an Agile Coach like a couple of my colleagues here, but it was, I just wanted to create better ways of working. Now, my journey goes back, and we're going to coin a term called first generation and second generation Agile coaches. My journey goes back to the mid-90s when I started, and I might even qualify for a 0 generation coach in this particular instance, but we're using first generation coach here. I was a tech lead, so my background is software, which is another characteristic probably of a first generation coach. I was working with a young development team, and we were having a bit of a hard time, and we stood back and we reviewed the way we were actually working. We came up with some different ways of doing development. I won't go into the detail because you'll all be fairly familiar with what we actually discovered through accident, but it involves small incremental changes, monthly releases. We were working in New Zealand. We had a client in Australia. We'd work for 3 weeks building something. I'd jump on a plane, go to Australia, demonstrate it, implement it if it was okay, pick up the next set of requirements and come back, and would repeat the loop. Now, we did it for nearly 12 to somewhere between 12 and 18 months. And in that time, we had a 0 defect production environment. So there was a whole lot of things we were doing good. We thought we were pretty good. Much to our dismay, our leaders told us we weren't doing things right. What we hadn't done was we hadn't taken our leaders on the journey, and they were going down a different path. They were looking for CMMI certification. Our little lightweight way of doing development didn't stack up. So my learning from that, and I didn't last in that organization much longer than that notice, but my learning from that is I didn't take the leaders with me. I didn't have credibility with what I was doing. We couldn't really explain it. It was a little bit wishy-washy. We had a great culture in our team. It wasn't things that people appreciated at that stage. So my journey took a little bit of a backstage for quite a while, and it was probably another 3 or 4 years before I actually got more actively involved, I sort of went back to doing development, looking for clandestine ways of doing this sort of working. And then I discovered the Agile frameworks that came out in the sort of early 2000s. Now, the frameworks get a lot of flack these days. They get a lot of perhaps put down. What I discovered though was the frameworks gave a credibility that our homemade, homegrown, highly successful way of working didn't have. It built a little bit of trust with the leaders that were funding this. It provided the early teams with a way of working. And we discovered that if we used them as a pattern to get started, they gave us this credibility. So what we learned as we went on was that if we were starting something and we had to take someone on a journey, we needed some credibility that was bigger than ourselves. Now, this is another characteristic of a first generation coach. You're often the beachhead going into an organization and you're bringing about change in an organization that's quite resistant to change, especially this way of working. So you're actually trying to change things. Another characteristic of an Agile coach is you're probably working from a project perspective still. So the frameworks that we had tried to break down the silos, they tried to break down the work into small chunks, engage with customers, provide feedback. But typically, even if you were successful, your project got disbanded. You know, your project was successful, it finished. The people got disbanded. We didn't have the long-standing teams. So over time, I took the frameworks into my kit. I took the values and principles that came with them, the Agile Manifesto, the modern Agile ways of working, and I created a blend that allowed me to build credibility. And one of the things that I'm always conscious of is whenever I'm trying to introduce change to an organization is building trust between leaders and their teams such that we're visible and transparent about what we're doing. Now, I've used the team metaphor in my whole career. What Cheryl and Doug introduced me to is a more personal way of doing it. What I'm seeing in our world when we're trying to scale Agile, the technical part of Agile, the process part of Agile, is we're staying with this team culture, which has worked really well for me and I have no problem with it. But I see the scaling frameworks that we're building are trying to grow networks of teams. And I've got a little diagram behind me. It's my only slide. I don't tend to use slides, but it's got 3 layers: team agility in the middle, organization agility on the outside. And today I think we're starting to build towards organization agility by trying to create teams to work in an agile way, which can be successful. But it's my hypothesis that it's the people in the teams that we've forgotten about. We've tried to create teams without actually addressing the personal needs of the individuals. I think everyone's got the potential to work in an agile manner and think in an agile way, have a growth mindset, all that sort of stuff. But what we've got to do is take a step backwards, in my opinion, to look at agility. Now, I think second generation coaching techniques are often in a position to start to do that because they come from a more professional coaching and they look at things from a personal perspective and growing the person. So my hypothesis is that as we move forward, this first generation, second generation, we've got to start looking at the second generation way of thinking versus way of working. It was successful for us in the early days. It's the way of thinking now, focused around individuals to create dynamic teams, not limited to small, long-standing teams. They have to become dynamic teams. And in New Zealand, we have a little concept called the team of 5 million, trying to fight COVID at the moment. And I think that's one of the challenges that we've got. So that's my little bit. That's my starting point. First generation, second generation coaches, ways of working, ways of thinking, moving towards second generation and ways of thinking, but inclusive, not separatist. Doug is, who's met?
Yeah, I'm hosting the Q&A. So we've got probably about 7 or 8 minutes just to take questions, and I'd ask anyone who has a question for Pete just to put it through the chat function. And while you're all doing that, Pete, I'm curious around. I'm actually genuinely curious because we haven't talked about this, but what are some examples of this kind of scaling by teams that you've seen as challenging? Like where do you see it not working in some circumstances?
So I think the concept of teams and networks of teams has come out of, or my experience anyway, has come out of the IT world, where you've got a lot of specialist skills you've got to bring together to create a product. The first experience I had with this and trying to scale dynamically was a job I did where we had about 25 people in our team. We'd set them up as 4 separate teams, but we didn't have enough skills to go across all 4 teams. So what we did was we spent about a month over talking about this and trying to work out how to actually change it. And what we discovered was if we looked ahead, say 6 weeks at the work that was coming through, we could actually start to let the teams dynamically form the way they wanted. We ran it for a 3-month period and it was going really successfully. I left the team. We had a coach come in that was very focused on fixed teams. He said, this is not the way it's got to work, and he changed it back. I was devastated when it happened. But what it reinforced for me is, even in IT, if we can do that, when we start moving into business agility teams, I don't think we have the appetite for long-standing business teams. I don't know. That's my experience. And I think we've got to be more dynamic. People have got to have the culture that allows them to play in the sandpit nicely as a team member on a dynamic basis, and maybe not have to spend months forming, storming, and norming, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Some other questions coming through now. So how would you, or how have you taken leaders with you in terms of introducing this kind of thinking?
So my experience to date has more been based around teams. So, and the scaling I've done has been around teams. The connection with leaders has been making our process and our way of thinking transparent and explaining what's in it for them. So I think, like anything, any change program that you put in place, it's got to be clear to people what the value is to them. And so with leaders, I basically talk about the way of engaging as being more humanistic from a team member's perspective, but being more responsive and being a lot safer in terms of the transparency it creates. So we do a lot of, we use a lot of transitioning practices from traditional ways of working to take leaders on that journey. So almost using some traditional techniques to build that confidence until we're actually given the mandate to actually go for it.
Okay. We've got a few questions coming through about second generation, and we probably anticipated that this might happen. I think Cheryl and I are both going to address some of that, and I suspect the way we're tracking for time, there will probably be time at the end if we haven't kind of answered that more fully. So if I ignore those questions, please don't be offended. We'll loop back around to that at the end. Pete, we've got a question here, is how do you see the individual agility helping the scaling to many teams compared to team agility? It's from Jesper.
So I'm not sure it's scaling. If I understand the question, it's not scaling to many teams. It's actually being able to move from one team to another and being able to have teams dynamically form and reform. I suspect at the moment, and this, what we're proposing here is, and we're looking for other people's feedback, as we look to experiment with this, what I'm seeing is that teams expect to stay together for a long period of time. We've got this concept of a long form team, bringing the work to the team. And it's more a sporting metaphor that I see worked well for me when I was building my teams and breaking down the silos. I tried to keep the people together and form a true team. I think now, though, we've got to create smaller units, and maybe it's teams of 2 or 3. It may not be, it's just purely an individual. But I think we've got to coach people in the skills to play friendly in the sandpit, to be able to actually form teams quickly and get up and be productive quickly. So I don't have all the answers to that. This is the point that we're putting out there, and we're looking for other people's experiences. Is anyone else doing this at the moment? I just see the limitation. I guess where I'm coming from is I'm seeing big scaling projects. They're hugely expensive. And there's a lot of activity. I don't see the value that's being delivered out of them as being proportional to the effort that's going into them.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. I think we've got time for one more question. and we'll go to Mark. So you said first-gen coaches bring changes into an organization that's resistant to change, and that by example, introducing a scale framework like Scrum at Scale, which focuses on creating a network of teams. It might actually build trust with leaders, but if you want to introduce a framework like Scrum at Scale in an organization that's resistant to change, how would you approach this?
I've never introduced Scrum at Scale, so I would be, perhaps I don't answer that question directly. I think the frameworks we've got at the moment are very useful to a point. And I think what we're going to see is that point's going to be reached reasonably quickly, and we're going to be looking for an alternate, a different answer. I don't see anything wrong with creating teams, but the focus on the sports metaphor around a team of keeping people together, high performance, it's the team that's important versus the individual. My opinion is that that's a little bit misguided. It's working at the moment, but it's going to have a ceiling, at which point we actually have to go back to building better individuals so that they can redefine their own teams. They don't get stuck in a team. And there's concept around, some of our coaches here in New Zealand have done self-organizing teams. I think these are the sort of concepts that we're probably needing to look to, that the scaling frameworks at the moment don't address.
Okay.
I think my 15 minutes is telling me there, Doug.
that would align with my timekeeping as well. So thanks, Pete, and just the rest of you guys. Thanks for all your questions. If they haven't been answered by the end, it's looking like we'll have a good few minutes at the end just to cover any of those off. So keep hold of them. If we don't get to them, then please probably ask them again, because the chat stream will be quite long. But now, a great pleasure to hand over to Cheryl, who's going to take us through the next 10-minute presentation. Thanks, Cheryl. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. And just before I kick off, I'm just going to put into the chat channel the link here for the white paper sign up. So there's a link that I put into the chat channel. If you click on that, you can just put your email address in it. We will not spam you. This is simply so we can capture people's contact email address, so that we can, when the white paper is ready, we can send it to you. And we just realized that sometimes it's good to put that in, not at the end of the call in case anyone needs to leave early, but we'll put it in at the end of the call as well, just in case. Cool. All right. I'm going to take over the screen. And I'll just look for a thumbs up that you can see what I'm presenting. What is my lens? Is that showing for people? Yes. Cool. So we keep talking about, one of the beautiful things that I love about Agile coaches is that we have many different lenses that we come into these challenges with. And starting with acknowledging what our lens is, I find can be so valuable for understanding someone's point of view. So this is a little bit about my lens and my journey that I come at the personal agility concept, and also the concept around first generation, second generation. So for me, my lens starts back in 2011, working as a project manager in IT, and I use the term controller. Now, I didn't quite realize at the time that was what I perceived was my role, but that was certainly how I approached it. My role, as I saw, was to control the things that were happening on a project, and do my best to deliver it on time and on budget with a happy customer and a happy client. What I realized as the challenge of this is that you can't actually control people, certainly not if you're doing work that is innovative and creative. And so there was a ceiling to how much this team could do and the level of agility. So this was a lens that I had at the time of being a project manager within the IT world. When I started to learn about Agile, I believed at the time that Agile is a process change. And so when I was coming in and to kind of bounce off the back of what Pete was talking about, I was learning the frameworks and the tools, and I went, okay, so we just have to change the way that we meet each week. We just have to change the way that we communicate how we're going to deliver. but it's simply just a process. So that was the mindset and the lens that I had in 2011. I unfortunately, or fortunately, hit a point at which one of the hardest times in my life, when I had the realization that you can't control people, and I actually moved out of project management, and I began as a professional coach, and I realized I much more enjoyed building people up than bringing them down. And I got into the coaching profession out of IT and thought, I'm never going back to IT again. It's a horrible world. Everyone gets controlled. And I began learning about professional coaching. And in 2014, I was living in the UK and got my certification. And I was very fortunate that there happened to be an IT company that needed a project manager or like a PMO, but they wanted to do things differently. And so I said to them, I'll come in and do it, but I want to be a coach. And so I had an opportunity to bring these together. Now I might just add that this wasn't a straight line. It was a very long, squiggly self-discovery line between those 3 years. Sometimes I maybe give off the illusion that it was an easy journey. It was a very challenging journey, but through that, it changed my lens again. And all of a sudden, I realized that change is a personal process. So in the professional coach work I was doing, this was nothing to do with Agile. It was nothing to do with IT. It was simply about helping people to make changes in their life, to live a better life. And so I started to realize this change element, this is so personal. You know, the decision of us to change our behavior is not something that we can do because someone tells us we should. In fact, that's one of the worst ways to get someone to change their behavior. It's something we have to decide. So my lens changed again. In 2015, I started to combine the Agile coaching frameworks and the tools and the structure in with my coaching. And I started my journey as an Agile coach. And I use the term enabler because I moved from unlocking people's personal context and actually in an Agile coach world, in a professional corporate environment, my job, as I saw, became about enabling the people that are there. And so this was quite an exciting journey. I've worked now in, I think, 11 different countries working as a coach. So it's been pretty amazing to understand what it means to be a coach in different cultures. A lot of learning journeys for me along that. But as an enabler, I was also working across different departments. And this is where things started to shift for me and my perceptions, because it wasn't just about helping IT work better. I started working with HR teams, I started working with marketing teams, and we were building cross-functional teams where we were pulling people from all parts of the business together into one team. I actually remember I was in Singapore working with a big mining company, and we built a team that had people from IT, from HR, from marketing, and the commonality on it was I needed to enable this team of individuals to work together, but I realized that individually they needed to work on their own way that they handled change and the way in which they responded to change. So this is when my lens shifted again to Agile as a cultural change. All of a sudden, it's not just about the process, it's not just about the personal change, but when we're doing this across many organizations or many teams or many departments, it's a shift in the way that culture shows up, and culture being the way in which people behave together. So the enabler role then led me into becoming an educator. So in 2019, last year, is where I started to do a shift between coaching people and actually teaching people some of the techniques that I'd been building. And I now work much more in the education space where I train and teach coaches how to do this stuff, especially around the personal agility side. So again, I would say coach of coaches. I know there's people on this call that probably fit a similar role. Working in the Agile HR space. I know there's a few people on this call that are also working in that space. And the link for me between all of them is around personal agility. And as a reminder again, that connection between it being a coach to an educator was a very challenging role, but it's taken me through. So this final lens that I now view is that Agile is a personal change. And this for me when I had that sort of moment of realization in that Agile is a personal change, it completely shifted my thinking on how we might approach people to support them best to be able to make these changes. If it's a personal change is a personal process, and we've got all these fantastic tools and frameworks that support it, we have to go with the people and take the people individually on that journey. So this is the model that you saw sitting behind Pete before. So this organizational agility, team agility, but what sits in the center of it are the people. And in my experience and my view, so often we're focused on creating the right structures that we actually don't recognize the people within the system haven't been taught the skills and have the knowledge of how to develop their own agility on their own. So a couple of beliefs that I have. I believe you cannot achieve organizational agility if the people within it do not have personal agility. This is a belief that I hold. It's sort of played out in that model. And it's certainly from my experiences working with teams, I can set up the perfect conditions for a team. And if the individuals within it do not respond well to change, we will have challenges every step of the way. So this was a continual challenge for me. Second belief, I believe our coaches are being asked to focus on organizational agility without the tools or knowledge of how to develop personal agility. So this has taken me also on a journey. I see a lot of my peers and a lot of the people that I have great conversations with. There is a lot of focus at the moment in the education space around teaching people and coaches how to scale this stuff and having the right qualifications that say you know how to run a certain session at scale. But how many of our coaches have been gifted the tools and the knowledge to actually be able to develop individual and personal agility with the people within that? And my belief is, my experience is, there's not enough of that education yet. And I believe we have an opportunity to be able to start developing that. So that is my, oh, stop share. That is my lens at which I come to this from. I have a real personal desire to help people learn how to develop personal agility. I've just finished a program of 6 weeks working with a whole lot of leaders testing out this stuff. And not only have I seen incredible things happen, I've seen big fundamental shifts in the humans that are doing this around how they show up to change. So that is my lens that I'd like to put forward. And I have no idea how many minutes I have for questions.
You've done well here, Cheryl. You've got about six minutes, so your time is superb.
Yeah.
Yep, well done, well done.
I forgot to hit timer at the beginning.
So we have a couple of questions already in the chat that I'll just forward on to you.
Cool.
How do you recognize if there's personal agility in the company? From Willem.
How do you recognize there is personal agility in the company?
In the company.
Well,
oh yeah, what I meant, should I explain it?
Yes, okay,
What I meant was, you were saying that sometimes we focus too much on the organization instead of the personal agility, which is not always there. So you were saying sometimes we invest in this organization when there's not even the personal agility. So how do you recognize if there is a chance to innovate in that organization?
Yeah, my first thought is there's always an opportunity to improve our agility, personally. As someone who works on this every single day, I'm always amazed at how I can continue to approach change differently. And when I talk about personal agility, I'm looking at how does this individual respond to change? And you'll often hear conversations around react versus respond. And that's probably one of the easiest ways to sort of define it. Are you working in an organization? If you spend a little bit of time in that organization and you listen to some of the conversations and you observe some of the behavior, how much reaction are you seeing versus responding? When decisions are being made, how conscious are people about the impacts of their decisions? Are people pausing before they change their mind, or are they actually taking some time to consider it and work through that? So there isn't a structured, scaled model for how to do this with an organization, but that might be a really great place to start, is by whether it's you observing as a consultant or a coach or whatever your role might be, or simply asking them to observe themselves. How often are we reacting versus responding? You know, when we're making big decisions, how do we make decisions in our organization? How quick are we to react? Because speed to react is not always in the best interests of our overall agility. So yeah, those are a few different places to start, would be that react versus respond. Thanks, Willem.
Thanks, Cheryl. Another question. What is the essence of personal agility from your lens, from Jeremy?
So I define it as personal agility is the ability to easily and consciously respond to change in a direction of intention. And I'll put that little line in the chat channel after I've done my talk in case that's of interest to anyone. But there's some key words there. It's around being able to easily respond to change. That can be one way in which you can measure your own or others' personal agility. You know, when change arrives, how easy do you find it to respond to that change? There's another key word there, which is about conscious. So I often say to teams and organizations, I can teach this team how to react really quickly to change, but how conscious are we every time we change? If someone goes, all right, we need to change mid-sprint and we need to change direction, I couldn't teach and train a team to be able to respond very quickly, but I'd like that team to be able to pause and think, is this the best thing we need to do? Is this the right way for us to go? And then the final component, which is the direction of intention. And this is often something I find is missing organization, team, and personal, is do we know what direction we want to be going? And that's usually one of the first questions I like to put to people around themselves. Do you have a vision for who you want to be and what you want to be doing? Where do you want to be in 3 years from now? If that's a really challenging question for you to answer, that probably means you'll have challenges making decisions on a daily basis around where you prioritize your time. So having that direction of intention is also really valuable as well. So the essence of it is combining those three. I call them the 3 A's, which is align, which is our vision, anticipate, which are our practices that we build in order to be able to handle the change, and then adapt, which is when the change hits, how easily can we respond to it? So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea, Jeremy.
Thanks, Cheryl. I think we've got one more question, but Tony, do you mind if we put that one on hold till a little bit later? We'll now pass across to Doug. Where did Doug go? I've lost him.
I'm back.
Yep, you're still there.
Can you co-host him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome
Hey
back.
Cheryl, can you make me co-host?
You're officially a co-host, Doug.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Okay. Great. Thanks, guys. And I have this reputation now, having done this twice, this being the second time, that my Zoom is not a stable player on my team. So if I cut out for whatever reason, I apologize, and I'm happy to kind of record anything, but it should be okay. So we'll go with it being okay. The lens that I'm coming from, so I'm just sharing my screen, and I trust you can see that. The lens that I'm coming from is supporting agile practices with a deeper understanding of intrinsic motivation and navigating complexity. So where my journey started in terms of, you know, encountering the agile world was I was running Daniel Pink's Drive workshop, which is helping people reach greater levels of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I was doing that here in New Zealand. And it wasn't long into that I thought, well, how do we actually embed this into organizations? How do we change that? And it was at that point that I came across Dave Snowden's Cynefin, which is really looking at, there's fundamentally different systems in the world, and how do we approach those in different ways? And I think it wasn't long before it started to go beyond these ideas of frameworks to actually shifting and thinking around actually what is it that motivates people, and how is it that I engage with my context to approach it in a more authentic way. And so how I landed in the Agile world was less of being an Agile coach, but actually providing those skills to Agile coaching communities. And one particular one, telco here in New Zealand, they had reached a certain level in their Agile ways of working journey and wanted for that to become more internalized in terms of people. They use the whole doing versus being. But my reading of it was actually, unless people decide that they want to be Agile, which is they want to live the values and the principles, then this big kind of change that they've done is going to have just a limited impact. And what was beneficial for me was actually working on the platform of existing Agile ways of working. So because there was already the cadences and the ceremonies and things like that, we could insert these, the things that we were trying to change the ways of thinking, we could insert those into the regular rhythm that the organization had. And the big learning for me was that in the way that I did that as a consultant, in the way that I did that, it was important that I was authentic to the things that I was talking about. So we talked a lot about experimentation, and actually I had to, frame some of the things up that I was doing as experiments rather than just kind of telling people what to do. So I'll come back to some of that at the end. But firstly, one of the questions that we had was, what do I see? And this is from my perspective. I appreciate there's lots of perspectives in the virtual room. But something that happens, and this is not just limited to Agile coaches. I think we often see organizations as machines rather than ecosystems, and Agile coaches therefore are these cogs in the machine, and they're one of these parts that we need. And if we get all of our parts, neatly in a row, then we'll achieve our objectives. Whereas what I'm starting to think is we actually need to see them as agents that can influence the ecosystem that we're in. Before we go to that though, how is this showing up? I think we're trying to scale Agile with an industrial way of thinking. So if we just gather the parts, in the right order, then we'll have an Agile organization. And we kind of miss a lot of the complexity that's inherent within that. People's roles can suddenly be flipped overnight to Agile coach. It's like you were a project manager, now you're an Agile coach. Good luck with that. And I think once again, it's sort of this thing of, if we just change that one part, then we'll resolve the problem. And then as a result of that, we're kind of seeing like many people have actually moved away from the term Agile coach because they feel like it's been devalued by people just simply calling themselves that. And I think in some cases that's fair, in other cases just created another set of language to deal with. Career paths for Agile coaches can be hard to define. And I think this is not because the path is hard to define. I think it's because we're thinking about careers as these kind of successive steps. Whereas actually I would say that the career in this day and age, careers are sort of have an emergent nature to them and potentially always have. And so we need to think differently about career paths. And finally, in terms of what I'm seeing, is that in smaller organizations, the Agile Coach role is outsourced. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I think where it becomes a problem is if leadership, effectively the people that are hiring in the Agile Coach, are just seeing them as this kind of mechanic who's going to fix the problem in my car, and then we'll all drive away happily, versus actually them getting involved in the process and seeing where they have influence to work with the Agile Coach to improve the capability of the organization. So that's some of the stuff that I've been seeing. And the other question was, well, where do we see this going? What does the future hold? And I think we might, excuse me, we might continue to see like contextually inappropriate scaling of Agile. And so we're not saying that frameworks are bad. I think that they're helpful and insightful starting points. But where we have to stick to them at all costs, because we're doing this now and fill in the blank of whatever this is, then suddenly we start to lose value, and we actually aren't making ourselves more agile. We're just creating, further rigid systems in some cases. I've also seen situations where there's kind of just pockets of Agile. So some guys in IT are trying, Agile ways of working, and, someone else is having a stab. And it's really incoherent in terms of what the organization's wanting to achieve. And that's where I think there's this real opportunity for focused evolution in organizations with Agile coaches as enablers. So we're kind of saying, actually, organizations by their nature as complex systems evolve over time. They can't be kind of fully designed at the outset. And so how can we, Cheryl was talking about direction of intent. I mean, I think we could think of that at an organizational level and say, what is our intent as an organization around agility, and how do coaches help enable that? And then, of course, the thing in the room, COVID-19 has actually presented us with an opportunity where people are heightened, their awareness is heightened to uncertainty and unpredictability, right? And some people will take that opportunity. Some people say, actually, we've got an organization that is ready to try different things because a lot of the assumptions that we had about stability are no longer there. And finally, I think this is my view in terms of what second generation can actually look like in practice. And I don't want to kind of put second generation and first generation as these two like totally different fields or contrasts. I just think that as we look at second generation, it starts to emphasize some things more so than others, depending on the context, okay? And so as we look at what second generation coaches might do, we think about the ways of thinking. And I like these kind of three areas where there might be an educational element in terms of knowledge transfer. Then there's actually co-created practice. They work with the leaders or the individuals or whoever they're working with to actually practice, design things that are congruent with this new way of thinking, right? So if it's like, actually, we need to change our shift to thinking about this organization as a complex system. Okay, well, what are some things that we can try that will be congruent with that? And then, building on that is this kind of coaching for fluency. So as we're practicing, there's this continual feedback loop in terms of improving on this. And I put this X there because that X can move depending on where the organization is at the time. So as a coach, we might look at the organization and realize, well, actually right now there's just a lack of knowledge about ways of thinking, and in some cases even aspects of agile ways of working. Okay, we need more education. And as a second generation coach, I'd be looking at this and saying, okay, well, what are my ways of making sense of this organization? And then where can I, this coming week or this coming month, where can I most make my biggest impact in terms of these different areas that I could work on? And yeah, so that's kind of my view, really hinging on how do we see the organization as an ecosystem, and how do we see the second generation coach, or just agile coaches in general, as agents that are influencing that, not kind of controlling it, you know, assuming that they could even see the whole thing. Cool. So I think I'm within time.
Nice.
I haven't left a lot of time for questions. I apologize.
Awesome. Got some good thumbs up on the walk the talk, and obviously how can you influence over controlling. Question from Kim: what about organizations that want to go agile but are intensely delivery focused?
That is a good question. I might need more explanation on that one.
Kim,
do you mind unmuting and just?
Or if not, Kim, that's completely fine. We can move on to the next question. I'm actually not sure if.
Hi, sorry. I unmuted on my laptop and it didn't unmute on Zoom. Sorry.
No worries.
My question is around it's probably around sort of installing Agile. So what happens is that you get an Agile coach and they come in and delivery needs to speed up and you need to see results. And, you know, some organizations even hold the Agile coach accountable for delivery or deliverables or whatever. But I just find that organizations that are so delivery focused, people suffer as a result of it. But it's so I just wanted to know your thoughts on that, what advice you would give to leaders around that.
Sure. So I think, you know, where I immediately go with that is how can we create even small amounts of space within the week to stop and try and make sense of what are the patterns within the system, okay, like the system being the organization, and where is there potential right now, because often with this kind of stuff it's just like, oh, I saw this good framework and let's just dump it on top of what we're doing and that'll make everything speed up. But where is the potential where people actually, you know, it might not be the leaders, but where they're actually people that are wanting to do things differently and sort of think in a more agile way, that we can stop and actually work more closely with those folks. I think this is going to be a real struggle, and I think a lot of agile coaches have gone into those kind of situations and found it extremely kind of difficult, because really what someone was just wanting efficiency dressed up as agile, which is, you know, probably part of it, but not the whole story. And so I think something that I've done before is, say, taken the values, the agile values, or the modern agile framework, and said, okay, what is it that we're currently doing around this already? Like, where are we seeing aspects of this already in the organization, and how can we then build on those? So we're looking at what's the potential in the present that we can then build on. It might be a slow kind of process for you, but that would be my thought on trying to answer that question. Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, I think also it's systemic, right? So it's KPI driven. So whatever you're measuring and how you are evaluating performance, that's going to drive the behavior no matter what initiatives you run within the organization.
Yeah, and I think what you might want to institute is regular check-ins with the person that's brought you in, so leadership. You might not want to call them coaching sessions, but you might want to call them check-ins where you can start to influence the thinking by asking certain questions at that level.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool.
Awesome. I'm going to have to pause us there in terms of Q&A because we have 3 minutes, 3 minutes left. But what I did want to share as an option, well, actually 2 options. One is, if I put this link again into the channel, this is for you to pop your email address into the form, and we will safely and securely hold on to your email addresses and let you know when the white paper is out. Also, on the meetup page, under the description field, there are each of our bios or a link to our LinkedIn profiles. And I just wonder, that might possibly be, there's some fantastic questions that are coming in, which you may possibly want to take that question. And I know with Doug and with Pete, very open to connecting with anyone that's joined this call. And if you have a question you want to connect in, am I okay in saying that, Pete and Doug?
Yeah, I can see there's longer than 30 seconds response on some of these questions, and I enjoy that. Yeah, and you know, the way that technology has so beautifully brought us all together also allows this conversation to continue well beyond tonight. This was also an experiment for us to see whether or not anyone showed up, and whether or not this is a topic of interest within our European coaching community. And certainly there's validation that not only there's interest, I think we're all looking at some similar challenges together, and there looks to be a desire to maybe continue these conversations. So really appreciate everyone's questions coming in. Would love to hold this open longer, but also want to be respectful of people's time as well. You know, you guys are just starting your days and there's people in New Zealand that probably are waiting for quite a late dinner at the end of our days. So I just want to kind of close this out by saying thank you for being part of our community tonight. We've brought two sides of the world together in a completely cleansed and safe way that we're not passed any viruses between us, and we've still communicated and connected, which is incredible. Sending lots of good vibes to all of you as well. Obviously this is a really tough time for many people around the world, and so really just this means a huge amount to me, and I know my other co-hosts that are here, to be able to have these conversations with you guys. Again, feel free, please do connect in on LinkedIn if that's a channel that you're open to. We've also got in that form, there's also a feedback field, if it's a voluntary field, if you have any thoughts on maybe how we could do this session better. And also if you're interested, maybe we can set these up a little more regularly as well. I'll also pop into the channel where my little, here we go, a link to, I mentioned I would share, I've put a blog post about what is personal agility that sort of gives a little bit more information about my perspective on it. If anyone wants to jam on that, would love to connect as well. So, so closing out for tonight, thank you again. Before you leave, if you feel comfortable to unmute yourself and say farewell and goodbye, would be lovely to hear your voices, and look forward to next time we get to connect. Kia ora.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Wishes.
Thank you all.
Have a great day, everybody.
Good night. Good morning.
Morning.
Bye. Thanks.
Keep tight.